So there's already a ton of these videos out there, and I assume most people will not agree on my list and my reasons. But of course, you are very much welcome to put your own personal list and why in the comments below. And of course, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to help grow this channel. It would mean a lot. Anyways, let's get on with the video. Every Pokemon generation from worst to best. Generation 2, this is the worst of all the Pokemon generations, though it does have one of my favorite shinies in Red Gyarados, and a Ho-Oh is one of my favorite Pokemons of all time, and has two of my favorite starters, being Cyndaquil and Totodile. I just think the games are weak. The best part of the game is fighting Red and going to Kanto, which is the after game. If the after game is better than the main game, or the main story, I feel this is a flawed game. I feel it lacks the most story of all the generations. Yes, even Generation 1 and Generation 6. This generation was done way better in the remakes, which isn't always the case. I do believe this generation is the only generation in Pokemon that has not aged well, because there's no need or no reason to come back and play it. I bought Pokemon Crystal for my Nintendo 3DS last year and still haven't decided to touch it because there's no need to. I bought Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening about a month after, and back then I have not heard of that Zelda game until I bought it, and I played more of that game than I did Crystal. Generation 1, the basic, the very flawed, and the generation that started it all. I don't dislike this generation. I actually found so much enjoyment recently in some challenge quests I do. Speed running the game is quite fun, and there's Pokemon you can glitch to get and also transfer to newer games. That's always nice. Broken and imbalanced entirety that is Generation 1 is not just a negative, rather it is a strength. There's so much to do with the game because it isn't polished perfect. There is a lot to do, and people use this to, it opens avenues up to have more fun with the game, it opens avenues up to play the game in even a different way each time if you want to. But it being broken is also a negative. Don't get me wrong though. This game is very broken. Freezing a Pokemon is almost guaranteed dead, which is broken and competitive because it's a 10% chance, no matter what, to kill a Pokemon using Ice Beam besides on Ice types. You put any type of Pokemon on a status and it's auto catch, but your ball can miss just for no reason even if you have it down at red health. Every move can miss with the 1 out of 256 glitch. Not to mention everyone understands this game is for the Game Boy and it is not graphically capable of better. But fuck these sprites. Many people argue that's not fair for the game, but it is. It is incredibly fair because this is part of the game. Generation 6, I love this generation. In fact, Pokemon XY is the only game I've ever owned to hit a playtime of 999 hours and 59 minutes, max adventure time in a Pokemon game. Introduced some of my very favorite Pokemons, Aegislash, Xerneas, Shiny Aurorus, as well as absolute beautiful Mega Evolution, the player search system, amazing multiplayer feature, the friend safari was excellent as well. But as much as I loved this generation, there's flaws to it. It is the only generation in my opinion to make a subpar and underwhelming remake. I was very excited for the remakes, and I 100% Alpha Sapphire, but it was just not there. I felt like it was more of a chore than forcing myself to play ORAS. In ORAS, you're giving a legendary Pokemon, you're giving one of the Lottie twins. With that, you could just walk through the game with a legendary that has amazing stats at level like 35. So that is a very just hand-holdy way to get through the game. As well, in Generation 6, it introduced the all-team experience share. People can argue that you can just turn it off, but it is still part of the game, and when something is easier in a game, most people choose to make the easier decision. Full 3D models animated is an amazing feature, just some look a bit off. And finally, when I said there's beautiful Mega Evolutions, I meant the idea and the design. The execution, well, there were barely any Megas you could use during the main story of X and Y, and the execution of it in battle was very flawed as well. When you Mega Evolve a Pokemon, that Pokemon has to wait its turn for its stats and abilities to catch up, which is awful. Generation 7, this is kind of how you go about giving some sort of a story. It is very cheesy at times. I understand it is a children's game, but so are Legend of Zelda games, which have complex and dark element stories. Unlike the other 3 generations I talked about, I'm harping so much on the story because this was all the praise is for Sun and Moon. Outside of it is a very lackluster experience. As well, having a second game for it to play with, it could have advanced the story a whole lot more. But the sequel games were called Ultra Sun and Moon, and they took away the mystery and redid the story to make the antagonist of the first game, Lusamine, into a protagonist. It is a shame that I love Lusamine in the originals because she was the counterpart, the rival that made Lily grow up. She was the opposite of Lily in the original games. They removed her. The retconning why Lily had this amazing character shift, it really takes away from the amazing scene in Pawn Island. I like the story. I was into the story. It might be one of the better stories for Pokemon, but it lacks a lot to make it an excellent story. This gameplay is laggy, but it does fix a lot of the issues that people had with X and Y and ORS. The part of it where the Megas had a delay stats and ability upgrade were fixed. X and Y lack facial expressions. That was a big disappointment people had, so there's more of that, I guess. The difficulty ramped up a bit. I did not find myself level 80 before the Elite Four, but rather just 4 or 5 levels above 55. It is very slow. Because of the lag and just in general the gameplay, I do enjoy the competitive the most out of every generation, but there is a lot more flaws than I would like to admit. Generation 3, now we are getting into games that I really personally enjoy. These are the generations I believe are the golden age of Pokemon. This generation remade Generation 1 and applied tons of changes. These games were Fire Red and Leaf Green respectively. They even added an amazing aftergame to explore 7 different islands, properly named the Sevi Islands. Though this is not the selling point of these remakes, they took the base games, changed the imbalance and most broken part of the originals. They lowered the champions level a bit, but that's as far as easing up the game, unlike handing you a legendary Pokemon without hunting or asking for one. The sprites look very clean and you can tell what Pokemon is from their back sprites. Arguably, they made the game harder. They did not have Generation 1 AI level when they were awful and just attack with a super effective typing move, even if it did not do any damage. Also, part of Generation 3 was Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, games that were clever and added a new way to battle in double battles, which would become staples for the Pokemon series in competitive. The best way to play Pokemon is under double battle formats, because the moves and abilities are the most useful with a teammate. As well, the Battle Frontier was introduced, which gave more competitive introductions for players. Though both games lack a very structural story, there was one to get you to progress through the story, and also had a sick trio legendary that looks amazing, especially in Emerald in the fighting scene in Sootopolis City. Generation 4 is second on the list. When looking back at Generation 4, people have this enjoyment feeling for the games, mainly because it was part of their childhood, and it was my favorite games growing up. Even though Diamond and Pearl were unbearably slow, they were still my favorite games. They showed for the first time ever their Wi-Fi capabilities, giving out event Pokemons and also allowing players to battle over Wi-Fi. Also, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, some of the most beloved games of the Pokemon series, are a part of this generation. These games included many amazing elements that made the game good, but I really know displacing well-known tons of people because it meant Generation 1 is not the best. Controversially, this generation is on top, which is Generation 5 is the best generation of Pokemon in my opinion. Let me explain. This game puts you into a new region where you don't know any of the Pokemons. You're not slowed by text, speed, or walking animation like Diamond and Pearl. Each character feels like they are a character, from Hilda to Sharon to N to Ghetsis. Your rival is trying to achieve something as well. Silver from Generation 2 and 4 had layers too, but lack a lot of development, unlike these two where they hound you for the entire game. The games are sound, and when you start the game, it puts you into relive in Pokemon mode. Find and search for Pokemons for your team without prior bias. I say an even harder final boss in Ghetsis than Cynthia. As a kid, I did black out 2 or 3 times on Ghetsis, mainly because my team was bad and I was a terrible player, but I never once blacked out on Cynthia. Speaking of Cynthia, she's also in this game, so you get to have an amazing fight with Ghetsis and an amazing fight with Cynthia. And then Black 2 and White 2 comes out, and for everyone complaining about not having prior generation of Pokemons in the main story, there is Black and White 2. They did not introduce alternate forms. That was introduced from Generation 4, but Generation 5 expanded on the idea with many different Pokemon, and it also led the way for the DNA Splicer, which gave a very weak legendary Pokemon Kyurem into a monster's Kyurem Black and Kyurem White, both being top tier Pokemons and competitive. And speaking on competitive, they introduced hidden abilities to make Pokemons more viable and give more variety, but these abilities would end up taking over competitive and made it a weather war affair. The story was quite interesting as well, not a lot of credit compared to how people rave about Sun and Moon, and its sequel tied into what its predecessor built before it. If I had to choose a definitive way to play Pokemon, it would be Black and White, because it gives you what you want in a complete mystery of Pokemons, and you have to figure out what you want, as well as given some animated sprites which I believe are top notch, and I prefer them over 3D models some of the time. There are a ton of flaws, including the triple battle and rotation battle style. Good for them to experiment, but adding more Pokemons to a battlefield does not seem to be a better game mode. Continual usage of specific event areas where I need an event to experience, which is something I dislike a lot. Locking parts off of a game, meaning I cannot experience unless I had to either pay or attend something I might not have knowledge of, is infuriating. But I can't look past all of these flaws and say these games are the best Game Freak has made so far. I have high expectations for what's to come. I want these newer games to have massive success. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. If you watched this video all the way to this point, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It greatly helps the channel, and of course let me know your favorite Pokemon generation in the comments below. My name's Alpha, and I'm out.